Hello, everyone. My name is Margaret Smith, and I'm the Executive Director of the Trumpeter Swan Society, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar, um, Wisconsin's Trumpeter Swan Recovery Program, a 40-year perspective, but doing it Wisconsin style. Today's webinar is being recorded. You as a participant are muted and your video is turned off. We welcome questions, so please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And at the very end of the webinar, as you're closing out, there'll be a very short survey at the end that I definitely hope you will fill out because it's pretty important. I look at all of that. And then in 2 days, you'll receive a link to the recording. Before we begin, a couple people here from the Trumpeter Swan Society board are here as well. There's Jim Hawkins from the Yukon and Tiffany Mayo as well from Ohio. And both of them have been presenters as well. So Jim did our Yukon webinar and Tiffany did our the zoo, the importance and the impact of zoos. Now, before we get started, I just want to tell you a little bit more about what Trumpeter Swan Society does. We do education. So for example, this webinar that you're attending, we're also planning a swan conference in July of 2026, so this summer, which we have about every 3 or 4 years. Where all the swan experts come together and share information and research, and we have a fabulous field trip. So you can learn more about that on our website. We also have a citizen science program called Trumpeter Watch, where people can submit and report trumpeter swans that they see, and then I review those and send them to the appropriate people. We're involved with restoration, so we're working in Oregon to return swans to that state. And we also do outreach and advocacy. So sometimes issues will come up and we might sign on to letters or let you know about important issues that are impacting swans or wetlands that we would want you to know about or to act on. So now I'm going to turn it over to our presenter, Sumner Matteson from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Sumner, take it away.
Thank you, Margaret. And first, I'd like to thank the Trumpeter Swan Society for their hosting of this webinar and for all of their support for Trumpeter Swan programs across the Midwest. I'd also like to welcome all the students from near and far, including from my friend Tom Allen's class in Flint, Michigan. So welcome to you all. So this is a 40-year retrospective on the research, management, and collaboration involving over 700 different partners, many of which I'll mention as I proceed. So at first, I want to give proper recognition to the co-authors, Mike Mossman and Lisa Hartman, who were really the ones who were very instrumental in laying the foundation for the recovery program for the 9 years from 1989 through 1997. Their work on the research and monitoring efforts were very, very important. Then Pat Manthe on the left there, greeted by a friend at a swan nest that she was checking on. And I should mention just parenthetically that trumpeter swans can be highly variable in how they respond to the presence of humans. This is one such case where they're defending the nest. Becky Abel, the lower left there, she was the one that pioneered the decoy-rearing technique, which I'll discuss shortly, along with UW professor, at that time, UW-Madison professor of wildlife ecology, Stanley Temple, and also with Mike Mossman. Very, very innovative technique, which I'll discuss momentarily. And then in the center, lower center there, Ed Diebold and Randy Jurwitz. Ed Diebold was the curator of birds for the Milwaukee County Zoo when this program was initiated, and was very important in overseeing the incubation and hatching of the eggs that we collected in Alaska. And then Randy Jurwitz, my boss at the time, played a pivotal role in the program. He provided important counsel to myself and others in the program. He also participated each year in the egg collection in Alaska, which I'll talk about momentarily. And he had a very important role in that regard with making sure that all of the eggs we collected were maintained at a proper temperature. Usually it's around 97 degrees. And then Taylor Finger, lower right there, very important in the later stages of the program with conducting aerial surveys, participating in aerial surveys of swans to arrive at our breeding population estimate, a waterfowl ecologist with the department. So I want to talk here about the this map and the beginnings of our efforts. I should mention before discussing the map here that in 1985, there was discussion within the Wisconsin DNR of whether or not we should begin focusing on whooping cranes or on trumpeter swans. And since Minnesota had already initiated their efforts, we decided to focus on trumpeter swans. And so in 1986, I wrote a recovery plan along with biologists Tim Andrick and John Wetzel. But this map that you see here in yellow is the historic breeding range of the trumpeter swan, and light green is the historic wintering areas, which you can see extends down the Mississippi River down to the Gulf Coast, and then in the east along the Chesapeake Bay. And in dark green is, at that time, back in 1985, was the principal wintering range of the birds. For management purposes, there are three populations of trumpeter swans. So there is the Pacific Coast population, largely fueled by birds in Alaska that you see in orange on the upper left. And then there is the Rocky Mountain population, birds coming back down through Alberta to the Yellowstone National Park, Red Rock Lakes National Wildlife Refuge area. And then there is the interior population, which is comprised of the restoration flocks from the different states. The core of the interior population currently, birds breed, they breed throughout most of the Western Great Lakes region, including Iowa, Manitoba, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, Ontario, and Wisconsin. There's also what's called a high plains flock. These are isolated birds from the rest of the IP that breed in the sandhills of northwest South Dakota and northern Nebraska. And as the interior population has expanded, breeding trumpeters are found in eastern North and South Dakota, western Pennsylvania, and upstate New York. It was believed that prior to the 16th century, based on the work of the late Harry Lumsden, that there were as many as 130,000 trumpeter swans east of the Mississippi River. The species was first described in 1805, 1806 by Lewis and Clark. And actually, the earliest known record we have of trumpeter swans comes from the wildlife artist John White in 1587. This was what's called an extraliminal record, in other words, outside of the known historic breeding range, which you see in yellow here. And this occurred off the southeastern coast of Florida in a place called the Caicos Islands, the East Caicos Islands. And so this record was first documented by John White in 1587. So, speaking of the 17th, 16th century, 17th and 16th century, we see one of the earliest records from Wisconsin includes that from the journal of Father Jacques Marquette in June 1673. The river on which we embarked is called Mesquissing, Wisconsin. It is very wide. It has a sandy bottom, which forms various shoals that render its navigation very difficult. we safely entered the Mississippi on the 17th of June with a joy that I cannot express. Its width is very unequal. Sometimes it is 3/4 of a league or mile, and sometimes it narrows to 3 arpents or acres. We gently followed its course, which runs toward the south and southeast as far as the 42nd degree of latitude, which was northwestern Illinois. We saw only deer and cattle, bison, busters, which was another name at that time for long-legged game birds. Could have been turkey or could have been crane, other species as well, and swans without wings because they drop their plumage in this country. Well, that last sentence, that last part of the sentence, we know that it wasn't a mute swan because mute swans, one of 3 species that occurs in Wisconsin, were not introduced into Wisconsin until the 1950s. We know it wasn't a tundra swan, the other swan that we have that migrates through Wisconsin, because tundra swans do not nest in Wisconsin. The only species that it could have been was a trumpeter swan, which was molting flight feathers. So this is our earliest record from Wisconsin. So our recovery goal was 20 breeding and migratory pairs by the year 2000. As I mentioned, this is the goal that we established in the 1986 recovery plan. We began that year, actually we began the following year, 1987, in southeastern Wisconsin. Dick Hunt, research biologist in the upper left there, David Matthews, wildlife biologist in the lower left, working with Becky Abel and Mike Mossman. And I should mention that just parenthetically, as you can see a mute swan in the lower right there. Mute swan, again, one of 3 species we have in Wisconsin. You can distinguish this from the trumpeter and tundra because it has a orange bill and a black fleshy knob that extends from the base of the bill to the forehead. And then the tundra swan, which was very similar to the trumpeter, but a little bit smaller, has a wingspan of 6 to 7 feet, whereas the trumpeter's wingspan is over 7 feet. Trumpeters weigh anywhere from 20 to 30 pounds, with the larger males, or cobs as they're called, weighing as much as 35 pounds. And the female trumpeter swan is called a pen, by the way, P-E-N. And what we see here in this picture is that attempting to place trumpeter swan eggs from avicultural farms or game farms under mute swans. And with problems that we encountered in 87 and 88, including using a total of 35 eggs, was predation by the snapping turtle, which you see in the center to the left there. So this was part of our recovery plan, but it did not work very well. It was not successful. We only had 1 cygnet or young swan that reached flight stage. So 1 out of 35, and largely, again, due to snapping turtle predation. Should also mention that another difference between tundra and trumpeters is that you can tell a trumpeter that by its bill, larger wedge-shaped bill than a tundra. It has a salmon-colored stripe on the lower part of the bill, or the lower mandible. And the tundra swan, and about 80% of the tundra swans, there's a yellow spot in front of the eye. Best way to tell them apart is by their vocalization. The trumpeter swan has a large, has a long, sonorous call, trumpet-like, hence the name trumpeter swan. Whereas the tundra swans, when you hear a flock of tundra swans, they sound from a distance like a group of baying hounds. So higher pitched than the trumpeter. So after the cross-watering effort, we decided to go to Alaska, which was part of our recovery plan. We were looking at collecting eggs in Alaska from 1989 through 1997. We were piloted to Alaska by the late Mary Kohler and Terry Kohler. Very instrumental. I had met Mary Kohler in 1987 on a international Crane Foundation trip in China, and had talked about the Swan program. They both Mary and Terry got a call from Governor Tommy Thompson at that time, governor, and asked if they would help us out, and they were more than willing to go. So they were very instrumental in the Alaskan egg collection effort from 1989 through 1997. And then in Alaska, the late Rod King, he was the fellow that was responsible for locating the trumpeter swan nests in the collection areas. The two main collection areas were the Minto Flats near Fairbanks, and then about 510 kilometers to the southeast, the Nelchina Basin. Rod was absolutely essential, critical to our success. He would taxi up to the nest, and then myself, or sometimes Randy Jurowitz, or 1993 Ed Diebold, would get out and then see what the clutch size was. We always had to leave at least 2 good eggs in a nest so the pair would have a family to raise. So, as I mentioned, the Gulkana, Nelchina basin of the Gulkana River in the southeast there, and then the Minto Flats to the north are the two main areas. The procedure would be that Rod would land at these nests that he had identified on topographical maps, taxi up to the nest, and then I would get out and approach the nest as best I could, and then see what the clutch size was. Often they were 5 eggs. Trumpeter swans lay anywhere from 2 to 9 eggs. Often it's 5 to 9. And the incubation period is 33 to 34 days, and the cygnets or young swans usually fledge or fly at 15 to 16 weeks of age. So I would use a handheld candler, and I had never candled trumpeter swan eggs in the wild before. I got my training sessions at game farms that I would visit in order to see what a viable embryo looked like. And basically, I was looking for a darkened mass over 3/4 of the egg. If the egg was opaque, clear, it was either newly laid or it was bad. And so often you could tell if an egg was bad by smelling it. But the late Joe Johnson from the Kellogg Bird Sanctuary used to joke that when I collected eggs for Michigan in the early years, that I couldn't always tell if an egg was good because I suffered from some bouts of air sickness in the early years. I didn't realize at the time that I had an inner ear condition that was later corrected with what were called scopolamine ear patches. But I was often quite that first year especially was quite ill from air sickness, and so Joe would like to joke every once in a while that he couldn't smell the eggs, and so therefore one of the eggs that we got turned out to be bad, and that might have been the case. So Randy Jurowitz in the bottom picture here is checking on the portable incubator that was created for us by one of Terry Kohler's companies, the Volrath company. In that first year, we were using the box that you see in the lower left-hand corner, which Carol Henderson had lent us I should mention parenthetically that Carol was extremely important to the early development of our program, along with the very sagacious counsel of Larry Gillette and Donna Compton from the Hennepin Parks District, later called the Three Rivers Park District. So that in those boxes were hot water bottles. And so we tried to maintain an optimum temperature of around 97 degrees. When the Volrath company created these portable incubators, it made our life much more easy and pleasant, because we didn't have to worry about arriving at places along the way on the return from Alaska to Wisconsin. We didn't have to worry about consulting with janitors at the airports, where we often would want to make sure we got the hottest water that we could to fill these water bottles. So Randy was in charge of that effort, did a fantastic job. So normally in the wild, hatching success is 60 to 80%. We averaged about 93%. And I attribute this to the excellent care that Ed Diebold, the late Ed Diebold, who passed away in 2024, that he provided, the care that he provided with his staff, and Kim Smith, who succeeded him in 1997, I believe. But they did a fantastic job of maintaining the eggs, and were really largely responsible for the excellent hatching success. That, in addition to the kohlers flying us back, we didn't have to worry about commercial flights at that time, and we could simply come back, fly directly back to Wisconsin from Alaska. So we collected a total of 385 eggs, 356 hatched out, 93%. From 1989 through 1997, you can see the different locations that alternated between the Minto Flats and the Nelchina Basin during that period. And then we shifted to, from there, once the eggs were dropped off, once they start to hatch out, we shifted to what was a new program for Wisconsin. It was not mentioned in the recovery plan that we had written, but this was a technique that Dr. Stanley Temple pioneered with Becky Abel and Mike Mossman, and had never been used with trumpeter swans before. In the upper left-hand corner, you can't see Becky Abel out of view, had a pulley system which would guide the decoy swan along a mat. And because the cygnets would imprint on the first thing that moved, they would learn to follow the decoy and associate it with a time to feed. And at the age of 3 to 5 days, we then would fly the cygnets up to decoy-rearing sites that had been selected by Mike Mossman and Lisa Hartman. And Marty Johnson was in the center left there. Wildlife biologist, was one of the decoy rearing individuals, and you can see the float tube, the camouflage float tube that he's got, and then he would simply lead the decoy out into the marsh with cygnets that were maintained in cages overnight. He would open up the cage, they would follow the decoy. He would then lead them to feeding and loafing areas. And in this manner, they would imprint on the marsh and then be allowed to fly free when they reach fledging age. Now, one advantage that decoy rearing has over captive rearing is that it exposes swans very early to the wetland environment. So the thinking was that because of that early exposure, that they would learn to survive and deal with the wild in a better way than captive reared birds, which were released at 2 years of age, and they would the thinking was that decoy-reared birds might have a better chance of surviving because of the early exposure to the wild. One thing that we discovered was that with decoy-reared birds, which reached the age of breeding at about 2, at that time, most of the trumpeter swan nesting occurred when the adults reached 3 to 4 years of age or older, 5 years, sometimes 6 years. What we discovered with the decoy rear technique is that birds could actually nest and breed at age 2 years. So this was a novel discovery, and really, I think, helped our recovery efforts, gave us kind of a leg up. But a very important and essential and critical program. The other major technique was captive rearing, where we would take the cygnets from the zoo, move them out to fenced-in ponds, where they were raised in captivity for 2 years. The flight feathers would be wing clipped, and they were eventually then released at wetlands in northern and central Wisconsin. Maureen Gross, wildlife biologist to the lower left there, was responsible for overseeing the management of the terns at the General Electric Medical Systems facility near Pewaukee, which was the main captive rearing site. Under the direction of Dennis Hussey, Maureen was supervised by Mark Anderson and Tom Becker, wildlife managers from the Southeast. Another technique, not as big as the other two, is captive rearing. And we had cooperators with pinioned or flightless trumpeter swan adults that were allowed to breed, and we then would take the young from those pairs when they were about a year old, and then release them at selected sites in northern Wisconsin. So the criteria for the selection of the release sites, it had to have a minimal or no waterfowl hunting, abundant, diverse, submerged, emergent aquatic plants, such as pondweeds or the potamogetans, a minimal uncontrolled human use, presence of emergent or shrubby escape cover from predators, absence of power lines. That's very, very important because power lines are a mortality factor for trumpeter swans. Abundant, diverse wetlands within 10 miles of the release site in case they would not come back to the release site itself, would go to another wetland nearby. And then additionally, the decoy reared sites required sites with controlled access proximity to the Wisconsin DNR or Fish and Wildlife Service maintenance facilities. And then also important was the water depth. For working in float tubes, this was typically 1 to 3 feet. And the presence of islands or dikes where we could put the overnight cages for decoy rearing. So this is how many birds were released between 1899 and 2005. Decoy rearing a total of 196, almost 50%. Captive rearing 159 birds, about 40%. And through captive rearing, 32 or 8%. Altogether, over 98% of the birds were released via these different techniques, these 3 different techniques. So what we would do then each year after release and as the years progressed, we would do every year spring aerial surveys to locate nests. We would do ground truthing, meaning we would go out to the nest site and to determine clutch size. We were looking at August flights to locate families and count cygnets. And then in August and into September, we did roundups of mostly cygnets, and we had pilots circling overhead and directing canoes and kayaks, helping us to locate where the cygnets were hiding in the wetlands. And then we would once we would capture these birds in canoes and kayaks with long-handled nets, we would mark the birds with Fish and Wildlife Service leg bands and neck collars, typically an alphanumeric code, a yellow collar, For example, 07KU or something like that in black letters against the background of a yellow neck collar. So easily identifiable with binoculars. We would do health sampling, collecting blood samples from birds and checking for lead poisoning and disease. We'd also collect blood samples for DNA sexing, and then we would weigh each bird. Then finally, we do one fall flight in late September, early October to determine production. So this is just a slide that shows you what was involved in going after a cygnet. This was this is a photo from 2012, the last year we actually did roundups of cygnets in central Wisconsin. It was in this case it was in Wood County. That's Ann Lacey there from the International Crane Foundation, and ICF was very important, providing interns to help out in the roundups of our swans, helping out here with weighing the birds, and then finally the releasing the cygnets altogether, in this case at the Yellow River Cranberry Marsh, again in 2012. The final shot of the group that were involved in capturing cygnets that particular year at this particular site, Jenny Lick in Wood County, central Wisconsin. So how have we done? Well, we've gone from one nesting pair in 1989 that came from Hennepin Parks up through 2014, which was the last year we did ground surveys. Should mention that Pat Manthe, after Mike and Lisa finished, Pat Manthe was my quote unquote field general who was in charge of monitoring the distribution, health, and status of trumpeter swans. Basically a 14-fold increase in the number during her time from 1998 through 2013. So we peaked in terms of the number of nesting pairs that we knew about that we could track at 253 in 2014. I want to mention here that the main causes of mortality at the beginning, we had 32%, almost 33% associated with shooting. The next biggest mortality factor was lead poisoning, almost 28%. And then power line collisions that I mentioned before, 15.5%. What we saw then from 1995 through 2005 was, because of education largely, the percentage of birds shot basically was halved, down to about 15%. Lead poisoning still remained a big factor, and I should mention at this point that very instrumental in the recovery of birds that were lead poisoned was Marge Gibson and her staff from the Raptor Education Group Incorporated in Antigo, Wisconsin. Marge has worked for over 2 decades in rehabbing hundreds of trumpeter swans that have come down with lead poisoning. So she has been absolutely essential to continuing to increase the number of trumpeter swans that we get out on the landscape. Then should mention also that power line collisions, again, another important factor of the three. Should mention that also in 2005, we did what was called a population viability analysis. Under the best estimates we had, we ran several simulations of models, and we basically came up with a result that showed that the population at that time was increasing 6% per year annually. The actual increase annually during 2005 to 2014, the last year that we did the nesting surveys, was almost 12%. And it was another conclusion that the birds really faced no probability of extinction. It was close to zero. Conditions leading to declining populations could be greatly increased adult mortality. And what we found is that throughout the program is that the younger birds did not do as well as older birds, so that there was decreased nesting success with the younger aged trumpeter swans. So this was the distribution of the 253 nesting pairs in 2014. As you can see from the decoy rearing efforts that we did in the Northwest, that led to 154, or about 61%, as the birds were decoy reared in other places in the Northeast and also in central, south central Wisconsin or central Wisconsin. Birds pioneered then to other areas on the Southwest and to the Southeast, but most of our birds are up in the northern tier, or the northern sections of Wisconsin. About 61% in the Northwest, about 21% in the Northern Highlands, North Central Forest, ecological landscape in the north, and then about 13% in the Central Sands area in the central or south central part of the state. This is a map that simply shows all of the different nests and where they were located. So looking at breeding habitat characteristics, generally that we found that these were shallow wildlife production areas, 1 to 2 meters deep or less. Also cranberry impoundments and flowages with sedge and cattail marshes. Should mention that these shallow state wildlife area flowages, marshes, and small farm ponds and glacial potholes were primarily in the central and southern parts of the state. In the far north, we did not have as many shallow areas. And in those locations, beaver ponds became very, very important for nesting trumpeter swans. So in terms of other characteristics, several of these wildlife production areas, wildlife areas were dominated by wild rice or cattail sedges. As I mentioned, beaver ponds, very important in the north. We also had them nesting in backwater sloughs and hardwood swamps. And then lake bay marshes and lake edge marshes. The nests were often constructed on small islands or islets, built up mounds of detritus or on beaver ponds with cattails and wild rice and bulrush. So migration and wintering. We did a satellite telemetry study back in 1999 through 2001 involving 16 breeding adults outfitted with satellite transmitters. We found that the shortest migration was about 41 miles or 66 kilometers to the Hudson area, with usually involving birds over in the western part of Wisconsin, the Hudson area. The longest migration was 607 miles or 971 kilometers down to Union County in southwestern Illinois. And essentially, these wintering habitats are very similar to the breeding habitats. In central Wisconsin, diked pools, cranberry lands, wildlife areas, in the wintertime, reclaimed strip mines, again, similar to the breeding areas. These strip mines were managed for waterfowl, and about 66% of our tracked individuals migrated to southern Illinois during the winter, while some remained in northern Wisconsin. Well, the trumpeter swan, which was listed in 1989, was delisted in 2009 because we were well beyond our recovery goal of 20 breeding and migrating pairs by the year 2000. So well beyond that. What we've learned through this program is that you really need clear, obtainable research management objectives. And it's important to have a sound funding strategy. We're very dependent on the Natural Resources Foundation of Wisconsin. And then we took advantages of fundraising opportunities. For example, we partnered with the Milwaukee Ballet Company for Swan Lake, and we did a little fundraising pitch there when the Milwaukee Ballet Company performed Swan Lake. Then remaining open to new and different approaches was very important. Decoy rearing, as I mentioned before, absolutely essential. And then working with partners such as the Bad River Band of the Lake Superior Chippewa for releasing swans up in the north at sites like that. And then build upon partnerships. As I mentioned, we had over 700. And then very important is to celebrate the success with partners and learn from failures and disappointments, which we experienced early on with disease issues. And in fact, although the recovery goal was 20 breeding and migratory pairs by the year 2000, in the late 90s, we were hovering around 17, 18, 17 pairs. We weren't sure if we were going to get to 20. And then in 1999, we had 32. And then by the year 2000, we actually reached 44. And from there, the population just increased exponentially. And then importantly, throughout all of this, even when you have failures and disappointments, to learn from them and persist and visualize reaching the goal. So I want to mention briefly here the major Trumpeter Swan program partners during this period of 1989 to 2014. We had the Wisconsin DNR, of course, Bureaus of Research and Science Services, later research later named Integrated Science Services, the Bureau of Wildlife Management, our Bureau of Endangered Resources, which was later named the Natural Heritage Conservation Bureau, Minnesota DNR and Michigan DNR, Fish and Wildlife Service, of course, very instrumental, the Trumpeter Swan Society, the Natural Resources Foundation of Wisconsin that I mentioned earlier, Milwaukee Zoo, and the Zoological Society of Milwaukee County, UW-Madison, Department of Wildlife Ecology, very important, General Electric Medical Systems in southeastern Wisconsin, near Pewaukee, Windway Capital Corporation, the Kohlers Corporation, which was absolutely critical to us being able to fly to Alaska. International Crane Foundation with all of their interns that helped out with the Trumpeter Swan roundups, and then the Trumpeter Swan or the Prairie Chicken Society, the Society for Tympanucus Copito-Panatus, helped fund our interns for several years. The VP Naperville Research Center in Naperville, Illinois, where we had a very successful pair of pinyon trumpeter swans that produced birds for us. The Wisconsin Society for Ornithology, a Red River Band of the Lake Superior Chippewa, then the Gottschalk Cranberry Growers, Ocean Spray Incorporated, Glacial Lake Cranberries were all financial contributors. And then with the satellite telemetry, Riverbank Zoo and Gardens, Wildlife Conservation Solutions, the Bronx Zoo, and then YCC Cruise, and then the other major partners here in terms of fundraising, the Ripples Incorporated, the Broken Foundation, the Johnson's Wax, the Johnson's Family Foundation, the Friends of Crex, Barry Wallace, and many private citizens who would report sightings to us. Menasha Corporation, Alexander Foundation, Three Rivers Park District. It used to be called the Hennepin Parks, renamed Three Rivers Park District. The Kellogg Bird Sanctuary, and Joe Johnson in Michigan. Joe Johnson, the late Joe Johnson, was very important in working with us and working with Trumpeter Swan programs across the Midwest. And then Marge Gibson, as I mentioned before, and the Raptor Education Group. I have to mention the DNR partners very quickly here. Wildlife managers, Mark Anderson, Carl Batha, Tom Becker, Chris Belling, Ron Eckstein, Dave Evenson, Jim Heffler, Paula Quaker, Tom Myers, Kevin Morgan, Brian Peters, Jim Raber, Mark Randall, Doris Roosh, the late Doris Roosh, who passed away this year, Fred Strand, Mike Steckmeister, and then wildlife technicians, especially Beth Arthur Lane, the late Beth Arthur Lane, very early and strong supporter of trumpeter swan reintroductions in central Wisconsin. And then Rick Green and Daryl Hardy from the crexmeadows area, actually from the Sandhill area, central Wisconsin. Then the LTEs, or limited term employees, Adam Fetting, Maureen Gross, Allison McGinnis, Kim and Dave Greenwald, Marty Johnson, Paul Plesch, Rebecca Christoffel, Becky Seibel, Mitch Ferguson, Ricky Lean, and David Flasspohler, and then the wildlife health specialists, Julie Langenberg, Sarah Hurley, wildlife health assistants, Carrie Beheeler and Barb Walzer, wildlife disease specialist, Nancy Buzengay, migratory bird ecologist, John Berquist and Kent Van Horn, waterfowl and wetland research biologist, Bill Wheeler, private land specialist, Harvey Halverson, and then bureau directors from Endangered Resources and Natural Heritage Conservation, Ron Nicotera, Charles Pills, Signe Holtz, and Aaron Crane. So this is a bird from 2015. At that time, the oldest marked trumpeter swan known in North America at that time, 82K. Collected as an egg by myself, U2, in 1989, and last observed in 2015 in Wood River area in Burnett County up in northwestern Wisconsin, reported by Kathy Java. I'm sure that there are other swans that could be comparable in age. But they might have lost their collar. So we still get reports of trumpeter swans with neck collars that Margaret Smith reports to us. So it's very gratifying, though, to see that this is a 26-year-old trumpeter swan. So after 2014, and really beginning in earnest in 2015, we shifted from ground surveys of trumpeter swans to aerial surveys. And Ron Gaddy from Bureau of Integrated Science Services, formerly Research, he added 30 transects to the usual spring waterfowl survey. So we ended up with 96 total transects, each 30 miles long, about a quarter mile wide. And it was based on these surveys that Taylor Finger conducted for several years. This was his view of the wetland as he was approaching a swan nest. You can see how visible they are from above. And let's go back here for a second. So very easy to tell where a swan was nesting. So we were able to get good counts of nesting swans that way. So this is a comparison of the breeding bird atlas accounts. This first one back in 2000. On the left here, we see the distribution of trumpeter swans, and you can see how the distribution has changed and the increase in number has changed with the latest breeding bird atlas, which concluded recently here in Wisconsin. We should have a book that should be forthcoming probably next year on the breeding bird atlas, but concluded in 2019. Well, we participated with David Wolfson from the University of Minnesota. We were part of a larger Midwest Canadian study involving 126 birds. In Wisconsin, we tracked 9 of those birds, 5 adults and 4 cygnets, equipped with satellite transmitters for 2 years during 2020 through 2022. And the study objective was to really learn about the extent of migratory movements, migration phenology. We learned that basically birds would depart around the end of October up through the middle portion of November. Average departure date was about 7th of November. In spring, the arrival back to Wisconsin, often close to the capture sites, and for long distance birds over 100 kilometers, was typically around the beginning of March, so 4th of March in this case. And then finally, we were looking at the association between migration and breeding, the bird's breeding status or location. So I want to just point out very quickly that here's an adult female on the lower left, 5P, also visible up in the upper left there. This bird captured in Iron County in July 2021, wintered near the border of Illinois and Missouri. And this was similar to what we found back in 1999 when we did the satellite telemetry study, that we had these birds that had established traditions that would migrate long distances. It returned to Iron County and basically was observed less than 50 kilometers from its capture site in June 2022. And so it utilized Wisconsin, Illinois, and the Mississippi rivers during its migration. Now, in contrast, we have a cygnet on the right here, and this was a case of a cygnet that was part of a family group, 1P, 2P, and 3P, from Waushara County in central Wisconsin. In this case, this 1P was a bird that when it fledged and attempted to fly, it hit a tree. It was then recovered and taken to a rehab center and released in the spring of 2021. And I show this because ordinarily on the left-hand side, when you have a family group, you can see this very distinct and defined migratory route and return. But in this case, here's a cygnet without a family group to follow and to learn from in terms of a traditional migratory route that was really exploring new areas. At one point, it tried to fly over Lake Michigan, came back. It eventually did head south and wintered near the Indiana-Ohio border. But this is a bird that really traveled far and wide, as far as it went up to northern Wisconsin and then came back again. Again, just sort of wandered all over the place. So it shows the importance of family groups migrating together and all the cygnets migrating together with their adults. So of the 9 swans that Wisconsin collared, 7 mostly headed down to Illinois, 2P, 3P, 5P, or Indiana, in this case 4P, 9P, 0P, or in the case of this one wayward cygnet that I just mentioned, 1P, down to Ohio. 4P made a big unusual movement up through Minnesota and into Manitoba before heading down to Indiana. So 1, 2, 3, and 4P were all the cygnets. 8P, an adult, made a big dispersal up towards Thunder Bay. It did head south eventually, but something happened while nearing St. Louis and the transmitter cut out. 7P, caught at crexmeadows wildlife area, hung around that area along the St. Croix River the entire winter and did not migrate. So we had some cases where adults that weren't paired up or weren't with a family that migrated differently.
Excuse me, Sumner, we got about 5 minutes left. So
okay, I'm just about done.
Good.
So again, the two cygnets, 2P and 3P, as you can see here, this very well-defined migratory route to the south. Project summary, again, this map shows you the distribution and movements of the swans, the 9 swans. And in 2025, based on the aerial surveys, we exceeded 15,000 and never would have imagined back in 1989 or 1988 that we would have over 15,000 individuals in Wisconsin. High confidence interval there, a wide number, but 15,327. There we are. We're all done. Thank you very much for listening. Appreciate it.
Great. Thanks so much, Sumner. That was very interesting. And of course, being someone who lives in Wisconsin, I'm always thrilled to be able to hear the state story. So folks, it's time for the Q&A. So if you have any questions for Sumner, please put them in the box at the bottom of the screen. And, we can have him ask or answer those questions. And Jim, have any questions come in?
We don't have any questions yet, Margaret, but there is one comment from Celeste who says that she's noticed since the mid 1990s there's a growing overwintering flock at Lake Malaloo in St. Croix County. I'm sure you're familiar with that, but she said now that number's in the hundreds, so that's interesting.
Yes. Did you say St. Croix County?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we've seen in the past is that we've had birds from both Minnesota and Wisconsin, western Wisconsin, that have not migrated long distances, that have chosen to hang around where there is open water over the winter. We also saw this back in 1999 and 2001, that we had pockets of open water in the Wisconsin River where we had some of our Wisconsin trumpeter swans also overwintering.
Great. There is a question from Amy. She's wondering if there are trumpeters in Hayward and Minocqua. I presume those are counties.
Minocqua and Hayward. Hayward is a town up in far northern Wisconsin, up in Bayfield County. So there are trumpeter swans that are in northwestern Wisconsin, not specifically in the Hayward area or in the Minocqua area. But if she would like to contact me, I can direct her to the closest area where she may be able to view trumpeter swans, either nesting or wintering. And of course, we don't want to get too close to trumpeters when they're nesting, but you can actually see them very well with binoculars. So if she wants to contact me, I'd be more than happy to discuss that with her.
And we have a question from one of our panelists. Marianne's asking if there's where's the best place to see trumpeters in Wisconsin at this time of year?
So this time of the year, they are basically setting up nesting territories in the throughout the northwestern, northern, north central, south central, southwestern, and southeastern parts of the state. So this would not be an ideal time to actually go out and try to see them, because they don't have established nest sites yet. They're just simply beginning their nesting cycle. But overall, in general, probably the best area to go is to the Crexmeadows wildlife area in Burnett County, the northwestern part of the state.
Great. We have one more comment, and that's from Mike Anderson, who's one of our board members. And I would echo this. It says, heck of a recovery story. It really does take a village to achieve something like this. But your vision and dedication over 40 years were vital too. So thank you. And I'm very impressed with the effort that's gone into this whole program, and it's just a resounding success. So I'll add my thanks to that as well.
Well, thank you for those comments. I want to reiterate that there's no one single individual responsible for the success of a program like this. It really does take a village. It takes a large number of partners to make this happen. And it's fantastic when you can see the results of their efforts.
Oh, and we have this one other congratulations from Linda, just for all the hard work that's gone into this from the Canadian swans and their families, I guess. So I think that's it, Margaret. We have no other questions, so leave it to you to wrap it up.
Okay, well, great. Well, thanks, Jim. And thank you, Sumner, for the presentation. I really appreciate you coming here and being part of this and sharing the story. All these restoration stories are really important to be able to capture in time. And I really appreciate you taking the time, to do that. So all the lessons learned and the efforts that it's taken, it's not going to be lost. It's going to be recorded. And I want to thank all you folks for coming and attending. I really appreciate that. And as you're going to close out your browser, there will be a survey, and I do look at those, as I had mentioned. So I do encourage you to fill that out. And then in 2 days, after I have a chance to get the recording up on YouTube, you'll get a email from Zoom with a link to the recording. So with that, I want to say thank you all for coming, and, Sumner for being part of that, and the Trumpeter Swan Society panelists that are part of this as well. And hopefully we'll see you again next time. So thank you.